Good morning. Good morning again. My name is Mike Howard. I am the managing director of what's called the Export-Import Bank of the United States. I run all the regional offices outside of the Washington, D.C. area. I invite you to begin eating, please. It's my great honor to welcome all of you for a critical and timely conversation about global threats and opportunities facing our country today and how America's role in the world matters more than ever to our local communities, including right here in Illinois. I am honored to be here with all of you, including USGLC's Illinois State Advisory Committee, honored guests, and with a true congressional champion, Representative Brad Snyder. I thank the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition for bringing us together this afternoon. I'd also like to thank our incredible event partners, Seroptimist International, Global Garden Refugee Training Farm, and the International Trade Association of Greater Chicago. This powerful group of leaders from around the state are Republicans, Democrats, independents, pillars of the academic, business, humanitarian, and faith-based communities. Civic officials and military veterans all have arrived at the same conclusion. America must continue to be a global leader. We all read the news, so we know there is no shortage of global threats facing our country today, as well as global opportunities. Personally, I want to thank Representative Snyder for his leadership and for being a force behind Illinois, both locally and globally. It is our hope that the dynamic conversation you will hear today will inspire you to continue this vital discussion about America's role in the world with your family, friends, and colleagues. New ways in which the United States is providing foreign assistance in more effective ways than ever before. Now, to tell you a little bit more about USGLC's work here in the region and around the country, to welcome Alex Grant, USGLC's National Outreach Director.
Welcome, everyone. Please don't be shy about eating. I promise I can speak over you. I know it is a little awkward at times, but thank you all for being here today. I'm Alex Grant. I'm the National Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. And it's really an honor to be here with you all. And I want to thank our Illinois Advisory Committee members, our local partners who helped make today's program possible. And really want to thank our featured speakers, Congressman Brad Schneider, Admiral Pottinger, and Catherine Miller for being here with us today. Now, before we get underway, I want to take a few minutes to explain who the USGLC is, why it's so important that you all chose to be here with us this afternoon. At the USGLC, we bring together a diverse network of businesses, humanitarian organizations, military veterans, faith-based leaders, and foreign policy luminaries. We are over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations, alongside business, faith, military, and community leaders from all 50 states who come together around the importance of our civilian tools and national power, development, and diplomacy. We are a diverse coalition of voices who represent a rich spectrum of backgrounds and experiences, from USGLC's year-long leadership training NextGen program to our Farmers for Prosperity initiative. Our network spans from coast to coast and throughout the country, from Maine to Arizona, Washington to Florida, to right here in Illinois, and everywhere in between. Our bipartisan National Advisory Council is made up of the nation's smartest national security and foreign policy minds, former secretaries of state, national security advisors, and leading former members of Congress. And we are particularly proud of our growing voice among the military community, who understand better than most the critical role that development and diplomacy play in our national security toolkit. Our National Security Advisory Council is co-chaired by Admiral James Stavridis and General Anthony Zinni, and comprised of over 260 retired generals and flag officers. Our Veterans for Smart Power initiative is made up of over 30,000 veterans from across the country who are committed to our non-military tools. And what brings all of us together is that shared belief in American global leadership. We believe that strategic investments in diplomacy and development are essential to protecting our national security, advancing our economic interest, and projecting the very best of American values. That's why we talk about how a tiny 1% of the federal budget, called the International Affairs Budget, is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments that America can make. And it's why we've been asking communities around the country, foreign aid, what's it worth? And today we're asking you. So on your table, you're going to find a card. Looks like this. You've got some pencils. Write down what you think foreign policy is worth to the community. And while you do that, why don't I share some thoughts to get your minds running here. Diplomacy, what's it worth? Funding diplomats and embassies around the world, supporting our key allies, including working with our NATO allies to meet the needs of the Ukrainian people in their fight against Russia's unprovoked war. Feeding the world, what's it worth? It's tackling emerging global food insecurity and preventing malnutrition in kids and other vulnerable communities around the world. And economic stability, what's it worth? It's supporting 1 in 5 jobs in the United States maintained by international trade and the American businesses that rely on global markets to strengthen our economic stability at home. So fill out your card, leave it on the table, and we'll collect them after the program here today. Now, it can be tough to see past the current headlines of global challenges, but we get an incredible return on investment for this very small expenditure. And we have seen tremendous progress over the past decades. Since 1990, the number of people living in extreme poverty around the world is living on less than $1.25 a day has been cut in half. That's 1 billion fewer people living in extreme poverty today. For every $1 the United States spends to prevent conflict, it saves $16 in response cost. And today, 11 of our top 15 trading partners are former recipients of USAID, and the fastest growing economies are in the developing world. And American businesses are taking advantages of these opportunities. Now, you're all here today to make sure that we don't squander this important progress while we address the headlines of the day. And I thank you all for being a part of our journey to build a better, safer, more prosperous world. So now I'd like to invite two leaders to the stage to introduce our panel today. Mimi Rodman, President of the Chicago Union Cares, and Ann Murphy, the Senior Director of International Government Relations for Cargill, which is USGLC's Heartland Initiative Chair.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mimi Rodman. I'm the president of Chicago Union Cares. It's a nonprofit that uses the power of sport to help youth reach their full potential. Today, I'm here as a member of the Illinois Advisory Committee of USGLC. I participate in USGLC's efforts, and I donate to them because leading globally matters locally. America's global engagement creates jobs, strengthens security, and expands markets here at home. Today, in this critical time, the United States is providing foreign assistance in new and more effective ways than ever before. And American organizations are working tirelessly to make the world a better and safer place. Strategic investments in these programs are critical to tackling global challenges like disease, poverty, and hunger. And when organizations, the business community, and universities partner with government agencies, real and effective change happens. Now I'd like to turn to someone who shares this belief. Ann Murphy, Senior Director of International Government Relations for Cargill.
Thank you so much, Mimi. Good morning, everyone. As Mimi said, I'm Ann Murphy. I am Senior Director for Government Relations at Cargill, and just so honored to be amongst this group of esteemed community and national leaders today. Many of you probably know Cargill, but for those of you who don't, our mission is really rooted in feeding the world. We're about 160,000 employees around the world, nearly 500 of whom are working in Illinois today. Working every day to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. That's why we are so proud to be a founding partner of USGLC's Heartland Initiative, because we believe that investing in development and diplomacy has immeasurable benefits for the United States, including American farmers and businesses here in Illinois, and is critical to advancing our interests in things like food security around the world. We are truly honored to be joined by such a distinguished panel today to give us their perspective on what global leadership looks like in a very changing world and why it matters. I'll briefly introduce them. Vice Admiral Carol Pottenger, now retired, served in the U.S. Navy for over 30 years. One of the first women selected for sea duty, Vice Admiral Pottenger completed several deployments and tours in the Pentagon before becoming the third commander of Navy Expeditionary Combat Command as a force provider of 40,000 active and reserve sailors. In her final 3 years, Vice Admiral Pottenger served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Capability Development at NATO Headquarters Supreme Allied Commander Transformation. Catherine Miller is the Vice President of Global Public Affairs for UPS. In this role, she leads the organization's policy development and advocacy in support of an inclusive trade agenda, with a specific focus on the company's engagement in Asia and healthcare business initiatives. Prior to joining UPS, she led the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's global initiative on health and the economy, which promotes the importance of workforce health to economic growth. She previously spent time at the Australian Embassy's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, where she participated in the successful negotiation and conclusion of the Australia-US Free Trade Agreement. And we'll welcome USGLC's Alex Grant back to the stage to moderate. But now it is my immense honor to introduce our featured guest, who is certainly no stranger to the people. Representative Brad Schneider has had a long career in public and community service with deep roots here in the 10th District. Before coming to Congress, Representative Schneider was a business leader here in Illinois for nearly 3 decades, principally helping company leaders plan and realize strategic growth. Today, he's one of the few members serving on both the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Ways and Means Committee, two of the most powerful and important committees in Congress, and is a recognized leader on strengthening America's global leadership and our partnerships around the world. I've personally had the good fortune of seeing Congressman Schneider in action in Washington and hearing him talk about the importance of trade and building these strategic relationships for American workers and farmers, and why U.S. engagement benefits us here at home. Representative Schneider, we are so grateful to you for joining us today and look forward to hearing your thoughts about how we can strengthen America's leadership together. So please welcome and join me in welcoming him.
Keep the applause going while our panel comes to the stage here. Second to get situated here. Thank you all for joining us here today on our panel. Thank you everyone in the room and also our live stream audience that is watching online. So we'll do our best not to create any memes or anything for the internet to throw around afterwards. But we're going to jump right in. It's going to be a bit of a heavy conversation here at the start. There's a lot happening in the world because, look, today global landscape is characterized by crises of extraordinary scale. Global poverty has increased for the first time in decades, resulting in a record number of people needing humanitarian assistance. That's 1 in every 27. Think about this room here. That is a significant number of people needing humanitarian assistance. At the same time, ongoing wars in Europe and the Middle East and strategic competition with China threaten U.S. national security, and it requires American diplomacy. Now, Congressman Schneider, as a member of the House Foreign Relations and Ways and Means Committees, you are on the front line of influencing America's foreign policy. And Congress recently passed a crucial national security supplemental package. How critical was this action to really ensuring America is meeting the moment in this time of growing global unrest?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me first say welcome. It's good to see so many friends here, and it's a privilege to be on the stage with such esteemed colleagues. I can't overstate how important it was. It was called a supplemental appropriations package because technically it's outside the normal appropriations process. But one of the things I kept telling all my colleagues is don't call it supplemental. It was an essential national security. And it was about United States national security, supporting our allies, Ukraine, who's fighting a war against Vladimir Putin and the Russian military. But it's not just Ukraine's war, it's our war as well. If Putin is victorious in Ukraine, there'll be Russian troops on the border of NATO allies, the Baltics, Poland, Romania, and there'll be many more U.S. troops needed to defend our allies and U.S. interests in Europe. We have a stake in the outcome of the war in Ukraine, and we have to make sure that Putin fails and Ukraine stays independent. Same is true in Israel. Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. Their target was Israel. Their mission or their stated purpose as a terrorist organization in their charter is to destroy Israel and kill Jews. But their broader purpose and part of a broader axis of resistance, as it's called, but it's really an axis of chaos, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, if you look at them, they're all going to find the same common root, which is Iran. And Iran's enemy, they talk about Israel as the little Satan. To them, the big Satan is the United States. It's U.S. interests that are at stake there. And different, but also affecting U.S. interests, supporting Taiwan and maintaining Taiwan's status. But it's not just the status of Taiwan, it's U.S. interests throughout the Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean. We have stakes in all of these. And the world looks to the United States. I've always said that the world is safer when the United States leans in and leads, but we can't tackle any of these challenges alone. We need our allies. The United States is distinctly positioned and capable to create these alliances. We established NATO more than a generation ago after World War II. It is vitally important today as it was over the last 80 years. President Biden is working on establishing new alliances, AUKUS with Australia and the UK. All of these are critical for protecting U.S. interests around the world and protecting a free future for people of the world. But if the United States is seen as shrinking away from our leadership role, it's harder to maintain these alliances. So I could speak for hours about how important it was, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, we've got some time here to dig into it. And Carol, and before I get flack, the Vice Admiral asked me to call her that. Carol, I really want to bring you into this because you have such a wealth of experience. And in that experience, why are America's civilian development and diplomacy tools that were funded in this emergency, try not to say supplemental, but the emergency package that came through here alongside a strong defense, why is that so critical in really addressing the current global challenges and keeping us safer here at home?
May I add my thanks for hosting me and my pleasure at being here with you today. I was actually born in Chicago. My mom and dad went to college in Chicago, so no, it's not my home anymore. I couldn't agree more with everything that the Congressman said so eloquently and in such forceful phrases. So very glad to have you representing all of us in Congress. So when you think about everything that he just laid out in our national security landscape and all of the challenges that we face, you could kind of think of a funnel. The desired outcome is our national security. All of the highlights that were touched on, and trade, and you name it. So what are the inputs to get to that desired outcome? Well, development, diplomacy, and defense are three of the most critical inputs. So you might say, well, I would just speak from the defense side. I will, and I'm happy to elaborate on lots of examples of that directly relevant to the crises of today or the past. But in my Navy career, development and diplomacy played a huge role as well. And one of the things you heard in my biography was my command of 40,000 sailors stationed all over the world. One of those subordinate commands was a maritime civil affairs command. One of those subordinate commands were the Seabees, our wonderful Navy Seabees, who go all over the world and build bridges and dig wells and help communities, be better and do better. Other of those subordinate commands were directly related to humanitarian assistance, disaster response. In one of my deployments down to Haiti, when that horrible earthquake happened, the hospital ship was under me, and they brought medical aid and all kinds of capabilities to help the Haitians recover from the horrible times. In another deployment, when I was out in Japan, I was responsible for a coalition of ships off of Burma. And you may recall in 2000 and what was it, 7, 8, when those horrible floods happened. And the Burmese government, I know they don't call themselves Burma anymore, but I'm going to call them Burma, refused to let our ships come ashore and bring that medical aid and that food and that water. We had an entire coalition represented there. Fast forward, what's happening in the Red Sea with our Navy ships, our Navy leading a coalition of forces, of countries to, not only combat the missiles and the challenges coming from those rebels, those Iran-sponsored terrorist groups, but to keep the lanes of communication open so trade can occur, so commerce can occur, so our national security can be protected. So it's really sad to me that we have to fund our 1% in an emergency supplemental. It's sad to me that it's only 1%. And I think it's just absolutely critical part of everything that the United States needs and must obtain in our national outlook.
So you mentioned the economic side, so I want to bring Catherine here into the conversation because the global instability has an impact. So what is that impact on American businesses and the U.S. economy, and why is it so important that America really stays engaged around the world to address these really growing national security challenges?
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for having UPS here. It's really my honor to be part of this panel. And UPS has been a long time board member and committed sponsor of USGLC in this agenda. And as a company, we're not involved in foreign policy, but we are here in gratitude and for Representative Schneider and his vote, and to foreign policy leaders like the Vice Admiral for making the world safe and operable for a company like UPS. We work in 220 countries around the world. And we are a globally recognized brand, a proud union employer, a best-in-class wage payer and standards for health and safety. We connect goods to businesses, to homes. More and more, we're connecting healthcare needs for patients. Here in Illinois, we employ 22,000 UPSs, 500,000 around the world. And we need a global environment that has open borders, that has predictable operations, and that has rule of law. And that seems to be a more tenuous proposition than ever in many countries and for many reasons. So we are proud to lend our support and, again, our admiration for the work that our foreign policy civil and defense leaders are contributing, and do our part to be brand America. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that in reflections of what does America's global leadership mean, you can ask 27 million Australians where I am from what it means, and they would answer very clearly and very forcefully and very gratefully. The alliance that the Congressman spoke of is so strong and needed, and every country must play its part, but there is only one irreplaceable leader to that, and that would be echoed by every member of that alliance, and it's the United States. And so I'm not here in any official capacity for my government, but just as an Australian citizen, and listening, I think, to Prime Minister Kishida recently when he was in Washington, that vote was felt and received with gratitude by many, many partner countries.
Well, thank you. And we've talked about alliances here. And this summer, we'll celebrate the 75th anniversary of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as NATO, an alliance that forms in response to the threat from authoritarian powers. Now, against the backdrop of this volatile international environment, these alliances and partnerships are more important than ever. Carol, you served from 2010 to 2013 as Deputy Chief of Staff for Capability and Development at NATO headquarters, Supreme Allied Command Transformation, and saw firsthand the value of alliances and strengthening American national security. Can you speak to that experience and why you believe that strengthening the key partnerships is just a smart investment for our own national?
Absolutely. It was a wonderful 3 years. NATO is a strange animal. I learned in the Navy it was command and control. In NATO, it's inform and persuade. You don't tell anyone in NATO to do anything. But it was really exhilarating to be part of helping all of the nations develop the right capabilities for the right threat at the right time. And we couldn't do that without the allies and the partners together. And even from then to now, I'm on one of my boards is a Swedish military defense company, and they just joined NATO. Another member of that board is a Finnish general. They just joined NATO. So I'm glad that NATO continues to expand, and the critical nature of what they bring to the fight is just very hard to capture and to describe to you. Maybe a couple of examples. When I had that job at NATO, we worked on something we called Smart Defense, where we tried to figure out what nations could bring what capabilities to what part of our portfolio that we needed at the time. The threat was, of course, Afghanistan and hybrid warfare and counterterrorism. And that's really continued to build. The U.S. military, you may not know this fact, but the U.S. military comprises over 70% of the total NATO military forces. that's okay, as long as the other countries that are part of NATO continue to try to meet their requirement of a 2% GDP contribution, which they're working on, and some of them have met and some have not. But we couldn't do it without them. And the congressman mentioned Russia, so fast forward to the current threat, and NATO has stood strong, and they've been there, and they have forces not obviously in Ukraine, but supporting Ukraine, providing equipment, providing training. There's been decades of relationships between a lot of NATO countries and the Ukrainian military, and it's a really critical part of that fight. And then there's the whole panoply of partners that are part of NATO's network who also come to train and would be there if they were called upon to bring their capabilities. So it's just an absolutely critical model. When I was in the Pacific, there was actually some chatter about trying to form a NATO-like body out there with ASEAN. It never went anywhere, probably isn't feasible. But there are some partnerships in the Pacific that do emulate NATO in some of the ways they operate.
Well, thank you. And alliances are so critical to countering authoritarianism, as you said. And look, rising authoritarianism has slowed this year, but democracy has declined around the world for the 17th consecutive year. Making us less safe at home, it's elevating the risk of armed conflict, corruption, and economic instability of reaching our shores. This is why the State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development invested in programs to strengthen freedom and democracy around the world. And this trend is really critical to watch this year as 4 billion people, as half of the world's population, heads to the ballot box. It is the most in history that we have had this many people heading to the ballot box in 1 year. Now, Congressman, how should America be using its civilian national security tools to respond to the growing threat of authoritarianism, and that is often hostile towards American interests and values?
It's a great question. When I go back, I was scrambling at the table when you were talking about what's foreign aid worth.
Sure, yeah.
And I think it up, but I think it relates to this question. And I only had time to look up a couple numbers. But in 1955, the relative GDP of South Korea, United States, our GDP was 40 times greater than their GDP per capita was $64. Jump ahead to 2022 is, I think, the number I pulled up. This was a scramble, but the relative comparison is 2.5 to 1. South Korea is one of our most important allies in the world. You can go again all afternoon talking about the history of our relationship with the countries, but the fact of the matter is, whether it's the Marshall Plan after World War II, other investments we've made as a nation in engagement, those alliances and the development of democratic governments that work on behalf of their own citizens, but work in concert with other countries and the United States is good for the United States, it's good for those countries, but it's also good for the world. So it is critical that we use, as the Admiral talked about, the 3 Ds. I call it a three-legged stool of defense, development, and diplomacy. We have to be engaged in all of those, and the relationships we build country to country. In all 3 areas, by the way, it is when we bring military officers into the United States for training, the joint operations we do are critically important. But just as important are the diplomatic engagements. And I'll take it even to a younger level, not a lower level, younger level. I had a meeting this week with members of the German government talking about an exchange program we do with high school students, 350 students going each way, and how important that is. Well, it's important because those students today who are 15, 16, and 17, in 20, 30 years are going to be the leaders of their respective countries, and it's important to have that engagement. So I can't overstate how important it is for us to use every tool at our disposal, and you throw in the Peace Corps, you can throw in so many other aspects to it. Every time anyone is allowed to go overseas, go abroad, wearing the imprimatur of the United States, Fulbright scholars, you can run down the list. They're representing our country on the one hand, but they're also learning the lessons that will serve our country down the road. And so I think we have to continue to invest in those every step of the way.
Can't agree with that more as someone who did one of those programs as a college student to Korea, funny enough. So it really,
I know that.
you did not know. Breaking news here. So I really appreciate your comments there, Congressman. And really, as we're looking ahead to the fragility of the world, by 2030, up to 2/3 of the world's extreme poor could live in fragile and violent environments, making them more vulnerable to pandemics, natural disasters, and extremism. And the ongoing crisis in Haiti and Sudan are really just two such examples of that. Now, Carol, from your leadership in the Persian Gulf, you saw firsthand how fragile states can pull the U.S. into conflict and impact our security here at home. How do these strategic investments in strengthening global stability prevent weak and fragile states from erupting into conflict, ultimately keeping us safer here?
You know, you gave, or one of the introducers gave a statistic about how many nations were now our top trade partners, and huge number, right? Compared to whatever, how many decades ago. And maybe even some of those, you might not have defined them as fragile states, but they were certainly underdeveloped states. So when you think about that journey for them, that couldn't have happened without the United States leadership and without development and diplomacy, as well as defense. So those three stools. You know, it seems so obvious to me how critical it is for the US to be there influencing and helping and offering the right kind of assistance and opportunity for those nations. But we've got a challenge on our hands with China, right? I go to Africa almost every year, and not to stray from the Persian Gulf, not to stray from the Middle East, but those of you who know what China is doing in Africa would be aghast, because it is ugly. And where is the United States? You know, we can't be everywhere, we can't do everything. But when we think about fragile states, when we think about the opportunity to foment terrorism and to foment really bad actors, you know, in these next generations, or even much less time than that, China is doing everything they can to take their natural resources and take their gold and take their diamonds and take everything they can and walk away. And the United States is just not there to do all of these development and diplomacy things that we need to do. The Middle East is maybe a similar story, but much harder, I think, to crack, because there's a lot of very strong autocratic governments there. So we're not really going to maybe be able to have as much ability to be on the ground. But I think in Africa, this is a classic example of where we're missing the boat a little bit in terms of opportunity to do exactly what you're describing, to prevent those outcomes and to build democracies, or at least democratic leaning institutions, while we can, before it's too late. Maybe it's already too late.
I'm curious, I saw some heads nodding. Who here has been to Africa and has seen the investment from China? Hands up. And those on the live stream with their hands up at home. Really, it's a really incredible thing to see. Frightening is the right word. And you know, we talk about China, we talk about supply chains and that economic element too. So Catherine, you know, over the last few years, the vulnerability of global supply chains we've seen, the vulnerability due to disruptions from regional conflict to global pandemics we all remember quite well, has become more and more apparent. But UPS has been leading the way when it comes to promoting sustainability and resilience across the global supply chain. They've been pioneering new monitoring tools and investing in last mile delivery networks around the world. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of investing in supply chain resilience for both global businesses and hard to reach communities, and why these investments are good for our economy here at home?
Yes, thank you, Alex. And who would have thought, well, no one at UPS prior to the pandemic thought they'd be lucky enough to have conversations with your grandmother or at Thanksgiving about supply chains and supply chain resiliency. What a gift to our logisticians at UPS. Before I just talk about that and an agenda that we're really passionate about at UPS on resiliency, I was thinking of the three-legged stool, and on diplomacy, corporate diplomacy from the US, I think, is a terribly valuable asset. Our brands are admired and envied by many countries, and the standard of which we hold our employees to, and how we contribute to employment and development in allied and partner countries, I think, is a complement to the work of our civil diplomacy as well. So on supply chain resiliency, there's so much to talk about and so much, frankly, that needs to be fixed and addressed. But in the spirit of the actionable and an opportunity for me, again, to thank Congressman, we are looking at UPS at what can we do in the immediate and how can we help in the most critical areas of the supply chain. And as I said earlier, UPS is very involved in healthcare. Thanks in part to the pandemic, our logistics services go up into the clinical trial and then all the way down to the last mile, as you said, Alex. And we witnessed a lot of trade barriers, a lot of behind the border barriers, investment issues, export prohibitions that happened during COVID. And we were an on the ground witness to that impacting access to medicines. We also are watching and respecting the national security discussion in the United States around biomedicine and changing some of the relationships with allies and sourcing. And the congressman is a co-sponsor of a bill, the Medical Supply Chain Resiliency Act, which UPS is supporting. And that, I feel like, is putting solution to really, really big, difficult problems. UPS, we trade in all goods. It would be much easier for us to say we want more trade with more trading partners, a big TPA bill and a new FTA with country X. But we recognize that we're in the political moment of the possible, and we see a really smart approach in this bill, and would like to contribute in any way we can to prioritize this specific area of critical good. We can talk about vulnerabilities and other needs that we need in supply chain, but I would say one other bright spot in addition to legislation like this is that this administration has truly taken the private sector in as a partner in supply chain resiliency, and far from feeling vulnerable to regulation and that we have to hide the ball or protect ourselves lest we get cornered into some sort of national manufacturing mandate. There's been a really trusting dialogue on security, on capabilities in the US, on the need for policy changes with allies. And I'm optimistic that we're on the right track to solve many of the problems.
And we talk a lot about how national security, humanitarian issues play with economic security. And Congressman, you recently traveled to Saudi Arabia to attend the World Economic Forum's special meeting on global collaboration. While there, you participated in a panel on the factors that are impacting global trade, from regional conflicts to challenging domestic political realities. And for background for those in the room, 1 out of every 5 jobs in the state of Illinois is supported by international trade. With Illinois' 10th congressional district being home to a number of multinational corporations. So how are you working in Congress to empower our diplomats to promote U.S. businesses and exports abroad? And how does this economic diplomacy, among other efforts to bolster access to new markets, advance U.S. American or U.S. economic interest, including for families here in the 10th district?
Great question. And I haven't used the term, but I'm going to start using it, the idea of corporate diplomacy, because I think it is important. It's a reflection of who we are as a country. And some of it is, we talk about the role Coca-Cola or Blue Jeans, I won't mention company, Blue Jeans, products that are American ingenuity, American entertainment, from music to movies, et cetera, shares a worldview in many ways, organically around the world. And I think there's strength in that. And if I listed all the companies, the names that would come top of mind would all be the large Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies. But Illinois is a great example. If you look a little bit deeper, the number of companies, the smaller mid-market companies that are engaging in business around the world is staggering. It's so many companies around, and I'm thinking back a decade ago when we talked about Export-Import Bank, we had a hard fight to protect that, but the investment in those opportunities are critical. We had just around the corner a meeting about a decade ago that we kept having to bring more chairs. It was a presentation by the Exim Bank about creating new opportunities abroad, and we kept having to bring in more chairs because so many people wanted to hear about these opportunities. And a lot of our companies that do business outside of the U.S. maybe have a relationship. Perhaps they met someone at a conference or even a conversation on an airplane, and it starts out as business with one other market. But what the real opportunity is expanding markets for U.S. companies to do business around the world and to take that first experience and using those skills and doing more. So we spend a lot of time doing that. Supply chain is a key piece of it as well. You mentioned before COVID, I don't think most people talked about supply chain. If they did, the most frequently, most common term that people would recognize is just in time. And just in time makes sense. I'm going to microphone, but we had this very delicately balanced supply chain network where sources and et cetera was to get the product there just as you needed it. It was literally held together by threads, and COVID broke that. Everything shut down for a period of time. And it's hard to believe it was only 4 years ago, or oh my gosh, it's already 4 years ago to be effective. But when the supply chains reopened, they didn't open how they looked at before. They opened like this. Nothing touched anymore. And so we're now moving to a place, the term I was using 4 years ago was we're going to see more, resiliency is going to be a term, and we talk about that now. Redundancy, you can't have just one source. And slack, it's no longer just in time. The pendulum will swing too far and you'll hear descriptions of just in case. What it really is about is having strategic depth, having the ability, it's a military term, but it's really the ability to say that if my source in Italy breaks for some reason, I can get what I need from Latin America or from Asia or from somewhere else, and having the ability to manage that. And that's where the logistics you talk about is becoming so much actually more sophisticated than it was with just in time. But it will be also more resilient because there's going to be that slack. Where we, government can, you ask about tools, we can enhance that with specific supportive policies, but also tax policies, giving the companies the ability to make those investments and making sure that we are creating that level playing field in another 2-hour conversation. But there is international tax is moving very quickly in the United States, especially with Congress. We have the ability, we have great flexibility, dexterity, and swiftness in decision making. That's a joke. We move very slowly. And if we don't make sure that the United States is at the table, that the United States is engaged, the world's going to move without us. So we have to make sure that our tax policies here in the United States, and we'll have a chance to rewrite our tax code in many respects next year as the 2017 provisions expire. We have to make sure that we're doing it in a way that recognizes role corporations and American corporations play in the world, but the importance that that role in the world has for U.S. interests here at home as well.
If I could just add one more layer to the redundancy and resiliency is the CHIPS. And this administration with the CHIPS Act and supporting companies in Texas mostly right now in terms of building our own capacity to design and produce those chips is going to be so critical. And I read just a month or two ago, the whole process down there is slowing down because there aren't enough engineers. They can't find enough talent in the United States to go design and build those chips. So if you have a son or daughter that needs a career.
As an
that's where
engineer,
they
let me
should go.
echo that, but let me say thank you. I should be touting Congress's horn. I dished on this a little bit, but we passed the CHIPS and Science Act, which is equally important. That drives innovation. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Both those bills were bipartisan. That creates the foundation on which our innovation and growth is going to stand. And the Inflation Reduction Act, which was a name that made sense a year and a half ago, but the investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, everything from sustainable aviation fuel, other climate resiliency aspects, and innovation is critically important.
Sure,
Can I
go
just,
ahead.
we're
I-
we're all chip companies now. I mean, Cargill's a chip company, buys chips. UPS buys 9 billion. They're not the high end, they're the legacy chips. We buy 9 billion a year. And to this point on resiliency, it's those chips that are bringing visibility into supply chains that are helping people know where to source, when to source, how much to keep in reserve, redundancy, all of that. And so the ways in which chips are supporting our agendas is just truly phenomenal. And thank goodness for the CHIPS Act.
So we'll have a recruitment table out front for engineers that are interested in learning more about this.
First table is the military. Then you can go to the
There we go.
engineers.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, make sure we'll have that clarified out there. But recently we did celebrate Women's History Month, and from Jean Kirkpatrick to Madeleine Albright and Condoleezza Rice to Hillary Clinton and Linda Thomas Greenfield, women's leadership is indispensable in effective U.S. foreign policy. We're lucky to have one of the trailblazers on our stage here today, because Carol, you were one of the first women to be assigned to serve at sea and the first female admiral to command a major combat organization. And throughout your career, you have made a point to emphasize the importance of women's participation in the national security space. In your view, what impact has greater women's inclusion had for global economic, political, and security outcomes?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And, we were talking at the table just before the gentlemen came, the women were talking. And I just mentioned that if it hadn't been for a whole bunch of old white men who mentored me and opened doors for me, I never would have had opportunities to be promoted and to command at the level that I did. And one of those gentlemen, Admiral Mike Mullen, many of you probably know him, said something to me once, and he also said it many times in public and private discussions. Why would we ignore the talent of 50% of our population? Right? I mean, it becomes such a simple equation. It isn't really, it's never been to me about gender or race or any of those things. It's really about talent. And if you don't give talent an opportunity to walk in the door and then make their own way, then you're just hurting yourself, and you're hurting your company, you're hurting your military, you're hurting your country. So if I've been a big supporter of women throughout my career, it's more because of that talent that can come from that part of our population. And I've also been a big supporter in NATO. And one of the things that I did while I was there, I talked to you about this smart defense, this pooling and sharing capabilities. Well, guess what? People are also capabilities in our military. And I stood up a task force, and the Secretary General of NATO put up with me. He said, okay, Carol, whatever, go do it. I stood up a task force called Female Leaders in Security and Defense. And we held panels all over Europe, and we just had great discussions about this very point that, whether it was Serbia or Bulgaria or the more developed countries of the time, Germany, Britain, believe it or not, I was one of maybe 3 female flag and general officers in the entire NATO military forces at that time. A lot better now, but it's just about opening the aperture, making sure that anyone who wants to serve can serve and has the opportunity to do so. And just 2 weeks ago, I was at the RAND Institute I was being hosted for a panel on women in security, women in security, not just military, but across the opportunities in the Department of Defense, or even some of you that work in corporate America. I consider you also to be part of national security. And what do we bring? We just bring our intelligence. We bring our perspective. We bring our strong belief in our passion and our capabilities. It's not that we're better. It's not that we're necessarily different. We just bring something more. It's not a matter of, what's this total sum game that you want to get to. So I've always thought anyone that wants to be good should have the opportunity to go do whatever it is. And I found that men who might resist these concepts, if they have a daughter, that resistance immediately disappears because they think their daughters are incredible and they should be able to do anything they want, right? So it really is just about opportunity and talent. It comes down to me.
Can I add something to that as the guy on the stage? Ironically, as I was driving here, I have a political speech I'm giving a week from Sunday to a group of mostly women, and I was talking to my new comms person who's a female. As we were thinking about what I wanted to say, I was telling a story. My mom will be there at this event, and I was a good student in school, but my mom took great pride at every school I went to, literally from first grade through college, the number one student, the top student, was always a female. And she made sure I was aware of that. She didn't need to, because growing up for me, what I saw is the point you made, that talent is not a function of gender. Talent is a function of ability, opportunity, and education. And the more we invest in all of our people, the better we're going to be able to succeed in an increasingly competitive world. And when I talk about education, Mimi heard me say this a decade ago. China and India have 10 times as many people. Simple math, if they educate 1/10 of their children at honors level, they have more honors students, engineers, scientists, doctors, artists, teachers, etc., more honors students than we start with as students. So we have to make sure that every one of our young people have the opportunity to reach their full potential and achieve their dreams. And if we are drawing distinction based on gender or race or ethnicity, we are selling our nation short.
And absolutely.
Good, I'll use this next week.
There you go. And Catherine, it was mentioned earlier that corporations play a role in national security. And that's because the private sector's resources, expertise, and technology are critical to scale our response to global challenges. Since 2010, the UPS Foundation has partnered with the UN Refugee Agency, providing logistics training and support to the organization as it fulfills its mission of delivering life-saving aid to vulnerable populations around the world. How do public-private partnerships support American businesses and build stronger, more resilient communities around the world? And how does a safer, more prosperous world really strengthen our economy?
Well, I mean, the answer is in so many ways. And, our presence as an employer, and I mentioned before, the standards of employment we have, the opportunity and training that we provide is key. But that aid role that we also contribute to, an aid organization could only dream of having the lift and capabilities that a company like UPS has. We have 200 some airplanes. We've got the best engineers and logisticians around the world. We know borders, we know last mile, we know cold chain, we know ultra cold chain. And the opportunity to contribute that to efforts as we were able to in COVID, as we've done in Ukraine, as we've done here in the US, very consistently with natural disasters, is a real point of pride for our company. And they're the physical assets we have, but the know-how is also, I have noticed and I've been at the company only 4 years, but I've noticed is really a great contribution. For example, in Malawi, we were training the Ministry of Health in cold chain and last mile delivery. And then we left behind the assets they needed, but also the know-how to continue to support that healthcare system. That healthcare chain now has gone beyond COVID vaccines into other healthcare supplies. And you think about ways we can do that on a greater scale, and we do it with partners like the Gates Foundation, with Project Cure, the Pandemic Action Committee. And these are all a byproduct of a company trying to do good in the world. And we are a for-profit entity, and we are doing well. And I should say, on the comment of female leadership, to my surprise, UPS is, we're a 100-plus-year-old company with the largest employer of Teamsters in the United States. When I was hired 4 years ago, my entire chain of command up to the CEO was female, which is, I think, very unusual in a company. And then we have our first female leader, and she's beloved in part for what she's done for our stock price, but she is a truly terrific talent, and that's a part of the UPS culture is diversity as well. So it's in the way we are first and foremost as an employer, and then what we can contribute based on the what we owe back to the communities that help us prosper.
Before you move on, I know you talked about corporate profit, growth, et cetera, but you also mentioned employer. What does the average truck driver earn for UPS?
170,000 a year. And as someone who has worn that brown uniform and delivered packages, they earn every single penny, and we are proud to pay them that. Those are hard jobs, and we have really strong employee retention. And the longer you're with us at UPS, the better your safety records are, the better your efficiency are. We have a whole of career employment in mind when we recruit and hire. And that salary is part of it. And we're tremendously proud of our workforce. And yeah, that's the salary that they're paid, which, by the way, is a third above our next competitor and double above the one after that. And it's at a cost to the company, but one that we feel is more than bears out more in the efficiency and in the success of UPS.
So we'll have a recruitment table for engineers, for the military, of course, and now for UPS outside. So we're growing the tables by the minute here. And one of our final questions here before we close up, Congressman, because you talk about food insecurity and hunger, relationship between that and conflict. It's steadily declined for 2 decades. World hunger has, but since 2017, it has risen, and it's been driven by ongoing conflict. Rising prices and decreasing agricultural yields. And today, more than 1 in every 4 countries have populations of severe hunger. And food security is not only a humanitarian concern, it is deeply connected to national security, because hunger is one of the largest drivers of conflict, with 70% of the world's food insecure living in areas affected by war and violence. Congressman, how should the U.S. respond to the scourge of global food insecurity, and why is it so critical that U.S. farmers, including those right here in Illinois, lead in helping to alleviate the global hunger crisis, reduce conflict, and promote stability around the world?
Well, you answered the question with the question is,
Did we trick you like that?
right? Addressing hunger, but it really is to reduce crisis, promote stability. And by the way, one of the causes of the instability and increasing hunger, agriculture also is one of the solutions, which is climate change. And if we invest in agriculture and do it in a smart way, agriculture actually becomes an opportunity to reduce carbon emissions, to capture and sequester carbon in the ground, and take steps. It's not the only solution, but it's absolutely part of the solution. We've seen in conflicts around the world, and this is not new, this is decades old, that where there is famine or even market dislocations, the part of the Arab Spring a decade ago, more than a decade ago, was because the failure of the crop in Europe and Ukraine and Russia, leading to increase in prices in Northern Africa that led to disruptions and ultimately can contribute to conflict. We see migrations of people around the world, and we are been at a point for a while where the number of migrants around the world is a number higher than any time since World War II. Much of that is because of challenges in in countries where food insecurity, other insecurity leads to violence, leads to or contributes to failed governments. So from our standpoint, if we're going to address many of the challenges we face, and immigration, by the way, which is the solution to problems we talked about earlier, for more engineers, for more truck drivers, for more doctors, teachers, et cetera, but that's immigration that is managed and structured versus migration driven by food insecurity, driven by safety. If we're going to address that and get to a better place, we need to address it that gets food to the places it's needed. What can we do? Promoting investment in agriculture at home, opening markets, but also making sure we're transferring the skills and technologies to promote agriculture, local agriculture, so that countries have a better chance of feeding themselves. All has to be a part of it.
Thank you. And so for our final question here, we're going to do a rapid fire answer for each of you. I asked at the beginning, talked about our What's It Worth campaign. Congressman, you touched on this a little bit already, because during the past few years, USGLC has been making the case around why U.S. leadership matters both at home and around the world. And American investments have helped save over 25 million lives through our global programs. We brought electricity to 40 million people on the African continent, and we created trading partners out of former recipients of aid. So let's start with Carol. We'll make our way up here. In your words, what's it worth for our investment in development and diplomacy here at home?
I don't know how rapid this is going to be. It's a really personal question to me. I remember when I was a teenager, I wrote an essay for the DAR, and it was along the lines of, I am a patriot and I will serve my country somewhere. And fortunate for me, I ended up having the opportunity to do that. And I still serve. I serve on nonprofits. I'm here today because I love our country. I'm here today because I believe in America's role to lead and to be, that shining beacon on the hill or whatever the quote is. So what's it worth? It's priceless. And if we don't do it, who will? If you don't do it, what do you do? What do you do in your communities? What do you do for your state and for your country? You're here. Obviously, you care also. So, let's all make it personal, and let's all continue to believe in the great America that we know and cherish and want and need to be in that place of leadership around the globe.
I second that, very eloquently put from the Vice Admiral. And as I said before, I've looked at this question from a number of angles in my life. I've worked for the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I work at a company. I'm married to a US Marine. I'm the daughter of the Australian Defense Attaché to the US. It's essential. It's essential in all of the roles that I have had in my career. It's essential for family in Australia, my family here in the United States. That's the price, yeah.
Congressman.
I'm trying to, first of all, I associate myself with everything that was just said. And the other side of the coin of priceless, worth everything we have. Because everything we have is at stake. The United States has benefited. As a nation, we came into being at a time of emancipation for the world, right? It was the great freedom of thought, and we have been a part of that as that opportunity and freedom has spread around the world, but it's spread around the world in no small part because of the leadership of the United States. We can't lose sight of who we are, what we believe in, and what our hopes and aspirations are for the world. It was mentioned earlier that I was in Riyadh. As an aside, I was asked to speak originally about sustainable aviation fuel. I mentioned that earlier. That's an initiative that I've been leading on, and thank you to the guests. It's critically important with those 200 airplanes moving stuff around the world. It's very unlikely that those airplanes will fly over oceans on batteries. We can make them fly over oceans cleanly. That's a great accomplishment. I was speaking on Sunday. On Friday, they shifted me from talking about SAF to talking about trade. Okay, I think I can do this. When I got on the panel, the first question was about who's going to win the election in the United States. So I realized that all my preparation kind of went up in smoke. But what I did talk about is we are facing a world where our adversaries seek to control, whether it's Russia seeking to control or reestablish its empire, Iran, or China, whereas the United States, it's a world where we seek to collaborate. And the work we do is priceless. You can't put a number on it. But the importance of collaboration, we have to put everything we have into it. That is the direction I think we need.
Thank you all. Round of applause for our panel. Invite my colleague Eric up to the stage to give us a few closing remarks.
What an important discussion. Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Moore, and I oversee USGLC's work here in Illinois and the rest of the Heartland region. And truly, the best part of my job is getting to work with leaders like all of you here today. I would like to thank Admiral Pottinger, Catherine Mallour, and Representative Schneider, as well as our community partners and all of the members of the Illinois Advisory Committee here today. Thank you again for your participation in this insightful discussion this afternoon. And thank you to Congressman Schneider for your leadership in Congress. When Congressman Schneider and other members of the Illinois delegation support America's development and diplomacy programs, make sure to send a thank you note to the congressional office, highlight on your social media, and share with your family and friends. Your continued engagement to show why America's global leadership matters to Illinois is very critical. On that note, please do stay on the lookout for a follow-up note from me with photos from today. And if you're new to USGLC, please make sure to opt in from updates from our coalition. You're part of a very important group around the country who have the ability to make an impact. And I hope that you're also able to join us next month in Washington, D.C. on June 3rd and 4th for our annual Global Impact Forum. It's a two-day exciting program full of speakers and networking opportunities, culminating in a visit with your congressional delegation on Capitol Hill. Thank you again for your support, your passion, and your voice. Because of people like you all across the country, America remains a leading force of good in the world. Thank you so much.